Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something I know has really caught your attention. Out-of-body experiences, OBEs.
Right. And you shared this talk by Ajahn Brahm, which is fascinating.
It really is. It weaves together his own stories, things he's heard over the years as a monk, and, even touches on some scientific angles.
Exactly. So our goal here for this deep dive is to explore what this specific talk reveals about OBEs. We want to unpack them a bit.
Yeah, not just what they are, but maybe what they could mean. Perspectives on life, death, consciousness, that sort of thing.
Could they offer some fresh takes on the big picture? That's the question.
And what immediately grabbed me in the talk was this incredible story about an Australian soldier in Vietnam.
Ah, yes, the landmine incident. Horrific, really.
Unimaginable physical trauma. His legs were, gone. But what he described happening next was just, it's almost hard to believe.
He talked about floating, didn't he, above the rice paddies, completely free from worry.
And he said it was one of the most profoundly happy, peaceful, blissful experiences of his life.
Think about that contrast, though. The absolute horror of the physical event, and then immediately, this immense peace and joy.
What does that tell us about, our underlying state?
Yeah.
That even then, this peace is somehow accessible.
Makes you wonder, and the story doesn't stop there, even in that blissful state.
He remembered his wife back home in Perth.
And their newborn son, right? His first son. He just felt it wasn't right to, leave her like that.
And with that thought, that specific intention.
He felt himself being pulled back, right back into his body.
And the instant he was back.
Intense pain, so overwhelming. He actually passed out, woke up in the hospital, starting that long recovery. It's just such a powerful opening story.
It really is. Raises so many questions from the get-go about consciousness, those extreme moments.
And this idea, this theme of pleasantness during OBEs, it keeps coming up in Ajahn Brahm's talk.
He draws a parallel, which I found interesting, to deep meditation, something maybe some of us have touched on.
Well, the connection he makes is quite intriguing. In deep meditation, he says, much like what the soldier maybe felt, our usual five senses, sight, smell, taste, hearing, touch, they sort of recede.
They fade out?
Yeah, they fade into the background. And what comes forward is what he calls a mind sense.
A mind sense, okay.
And this state, free from all that sensory input we normally have, it's often described as incredibly delightful. Pleasant.
It makes you think how much our usual reality is just dominated by those five senses, doesn't it?
Constantly. And he shares another anecdote, quite striking, about a layperson.
Right, the one whose meditation experience
generated a bliss apparently even more intense than a sexual orgasm.
which is saying something.
Absolutely. And this experience was apparently so profound, so transformative, it actually led him to become a monk.
Wow. It just highlights the potential for joy, maybe transcendence that might be just sitting there within our own minds, beyond the physical stuff.
What power might we unknowingly hold, right? And the talk suggests OBEs aren't just about feeling good. They can bring understanding, even practical benefits.
Like that story of the young boy, the Yugoslavian boy, undergoing surgery.
Yes, under anesthesia, supposedly unconscious.
But he finds himself somehow watching the surgeons. And he realizes
they're operating on the wrong part of his body. Even at, 5 or 6 years old? He knew they weren't fixing the real problem.
incredible awareness.
And what's fascinating is how Ajahn Brahm links this to a Buddhist concept, determination, like a focused intention you might cultivate in meditation.
So the boy, just in his mind, sort of directed them.
Essentially, yeah, he just thought, look over here, and almost right away, one of the doctors did exactly that. Found the actual problem, fixed it.
And the boy recovered.
He recovered. And remarkably, he claimed that from then on, he could consciously leave his body whenever he wanted.
At will. Imagine having that ability.
He apparently used it, according to the story, for some, let's say, unconventional things.
Like sneaking into football matches. Or movies.
Exactly. A bit cheeky, maybe. But it underscores that sense of awareness, that freedom from the physical body.
Beyond the football, though, what does it suggest about our awareness during these states?
Precisely. And this leads Ajahn Brahm to introduce the Buddhist idea of the mind-made body. Manomayakaya, I think is the term.
Okay.
Think of it as a more subtle body formed by the mind that can, according to this view, exist separate from our physical one.
So OBEs aren't necessarily like hallucinations or mental instability.
Not from this perspective. They could be actual experiences of this mind-made body. Very real experiences.
This idea really seems to connect with the story of Anita Moorjani.
Ah, yes. Her near-death experience during her battle with cancer, it offers such a profound insight into that mind-body link.
What she gained during that NDE state was this deep understanding, right, about the cause of her illness.
Exactly. She realized the root cause was the incredible stress she felt, always trying to live up to other people's expectations, constantly.
That pressure, that feeling of not being her authentic self.
Was directly linked in her understanding to her getting cancer, which is a radical insight, really, the power of just being yourself, releasing that pressure.
And the effect of this realization was, well, pretty extraordinary.
When she regained consciousness, she just declared, "I'm cured."
Doctors must have been skeptical, given how advanced her cancer was.
Understandably so. Yet her tumors vanished. It's quite a story.
It really highlights that potent link between our emotional state, our mental state, and our physical health.
It really makes you consider how much our inner world might be shaping our physical reality.
Now, Ajahn Brahm mentions the light often reported in NDEs and OBEs. He agrees it's blissful.
Yes, but his interpretation is a bit different, coming from his Buddhist background.
He doesn't see it as like God or some external being.
No, he sees it more as a manifestation of one's own mind. A mind that's inherently powerful, inherently full of bliss, especially when it's freed from the usual limitations of our senses.
So the light comes from within, in a sense.
It shifts the focus inward, yeah, suggesting maybe we all carry that profound light inside us.
Which brings us, naturally, to death, which people obviously fear. The talk offers a somewhat comforting angle on this.
Well, Ajahn Brahm relays the idea that while the process of dying might involve pain,
The actual experience of leaving the body, the OBE part of it,
is usually very pleasant, very peaceful. It echoes that first story, doesn't it? The soldier finding peace amidst trauma.
it does. And to help grasp this whole impermanence thing, life and death, he shares that analogy from his teacher.
The cracked glass. Such a beautiful, powerful metaphor.
We're all like a cracked glass.
Fragile, destined to break eventually, but knowing that isn't meant to be morbid or depressing.
It's more about recognizing how precious life is now.
Exactly, cherishing ourselves, our relationships while we have the chance. Contemplating impermanence can actually deepen our appreciation for the present.
Okay, so for those of us listening who might be thinking, this is fascinating, but is it real? The talk does touch on evidence.
Right, and what's interesting is Ajahn Brahm's own background. He trained as a scientist, theoretical physics at Cambridge.
So he comes at it with that mindset too.
And he emphasizes that evidence for OBEs is, in fact, accumulating. He mentions specific cases.
Like the tennis shoe story.
The famous one, yeah. Seen on a hospital windowsill during an OBE during surgery. A detail confirmed later, even though it was a weird place for a shoe.
Something the patient couldn't possibly have seen normally.
Precisely. He really just calls for open-mindedness when faced with these kinds of accounts.
And he also brings up research, more systematic research.
Yes, by a Dutch professor studying cardiac arrest survivors, people who were clinically dead and brought back.
And the findings were pretty significant.
Quite. A notable number of these patients reported having OBEs.
Describing what? Floating out of their bodies.
Often, yes. And being able to accurately recall conversations, events, things that happened in the room while they were, for all intents and purposes, dead.
So that adds a layer of, well, scientific inquiry beyond just anecdotes.
It does. So we have these compelling stories, these philosophical ideas, and then this growing body of research.
And Ajahn Brahm argues this whole area really challenges purely materialistic views of consciousness.
The idea that consciousness is only a product of the physical brain.
If people can have conscious experiences seemingly outside the body,
Well, it suggests the mind might be something more than just brain activity, doesn't it?
it opens up possibilities, maybe, for understanding things we might otherwise dismiss.
Things like magical cures, perhaps, or just the untapped power of mind to influence reality.
Speaking of the mind's power, he tells that story from his Cambridge days, the hypnosis experiment.
Oh, that's a striking one. It shows how powerfully belief can affect our physical state.
This student under hypnosis was told a regular room temperature nail was red hot.
Exactly. And he was completely convinced. He reacted as if in pain.
Not more than that.
He actually developed a physical blister on his skin where the cool nail touched him.
Wow. No physical cause for the blister, just the belief.
It's an incredible demonstration of that mind-body connection.
And it led Ajahn Brahm to wonder.
If the mind can create a physical wound like that with no physical basis,
Could it also work the other way? Could it heal?
could it maybe even shrink a tumor? He acknowledges, of course, that belief likely plays a huge role in any such potential.
This naturally leads into the discussion about rebirth, the continuation of consciousness after death, core ideas in Buddhism.
Right. The talk introduces this idea of a stream of consciousness.
Like a river.
Exactly. It just keeps flowing even after the physical body ends, potentially carrying tendencies, maybe even memories from one life to the next.
So death isn't necessarily a final, full stop.
More like a transition point in this ongoing stream. It's a different way to look at it.
And he shares that story, the Thai couple. Quite remarkable, though he presents it as anecdotal.
The stillborn child, yes. It's a very intriguing story.
They put a mark on the baby's heel, a blue line.
They did. And their next child was born with a birthmark in the exact same spot.
You could say coincidence, of course.
And many would. But Ajahn Brahm presents it as compelling, at least to him, something pointing towards reincarnation.
He even added that bit of humor about Charlie.
Right, maybe Charlie got an upgrade to a girl in the next life. It adds a lightness, but the core point is serious.
And this idea of rebirth, if we really took it seriously, the talk suggests it has huge ethical implications.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine if people truly believed, truly knew that their actions now would have consequences in future lives.
Would it change how we behave?
You'd think so. It could foster a much deeper sense of responsibility, couldn't it? More ethical conduct, more compassion, maybe even more care for the environment, knowing we might come back to deal with it.
The potential impact on society could be quite profound.
If that understanding was widespread, yes.
Now, the talk takes a slight detour, mentions International Joke Day.
Yes. Which led to someone in the audience sharing their own interesting story.
An ex-police officer, wasn't it?
Yes. And it's interesting how these seemingly unrelated things connect. He recounted seeing what he felt was a ghost, a woman, at a crash scene.
And that experience completely shifted his perspective.
Profoundly. It led him to get deeply interested in paranormal investigation. Just shows how unexpected events can challenge our whole view of reality.
And this somehow leads to Ajahn Brahm mentioning his friendship with Professor Bernard Carr.
Who is quite a notable figure, a respected theoretical physicist.
And also a former president of the London Society for Psychical Research.
Exactly. Which is a fascinating combination, isn't it? Rigorous science meeting an open inquiry into phenomena outside the mainstream.
Their friendship kind of highlights that these topics, OBEs, consciousness, aren't necessarily fringe. They can be worthy of serious thought, even within science.
Absolutely. It underscores that point.
The talk then sort of circles back to a core message, doesn't it? That was really important.
Yes, the emphasis on the heart and mind over purely material things.
Ajahn Brahm seems quite passionate about this.
He argues pretty strongly that our focus, maybe society's focus, on just accumulating stuff often comes at the cost of our inner well-being, our emotional, spiritual health.
And that things like kindness, compassion, a peaceful mind
are ultimately far more valuable, far more fulfilling.
Someone in the audience then asked about a specific Buddhist concept, the 5 aggregates, and how consciousness continues after death within that framework.
Right. The explanation given is that in Buddhist thought, our being is composed of these 5 bundles or aggregates: physical form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations or intentions, and consciousness itself.
And at death.
The first 4 form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, they dissolve. But the 5th, the stream of consciousness, it just flows on, like that river metaphor again.
So there's continuity, but not of a fixed, unchanging self.
Exactly. It's a subtle but important distinction.
This then touched on the idea that life, in essence, never truly dies, and even connections to modern physics.
It's fascinating how sometimes ancient wisdom seems to echo ideas popping up in cutting-edge science, like the possibility of multiple universes.
Or Stephen Hawking's idea of a universe with no beginning or end, no boundaries.
Both challenge our everyday, limited understanding of reality, don't they? Pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible.
And the main body of the talk kind of concluded by returning to that question about the mind's power over illness. Specifically, shrinking tumors.
Yes, referencing those experiments attributed to Mahasi Sayadaw that an audience member brought up.
And Ajahn Brahm's own awareness of cases.
Where tumors have apparently vanished, seemingly linked to things like intensive meditation, or just significant shifts in attitude, finding peace.
It's not presented as definitive scientific proof, obviously.
No, but it strongly suggests, again, that immense, perhaps often untapped power of our minds and how deeply connected it is to our physical health.
Okay, wow. Let's just take a breath and reflect on all that from this deep dive into Ajahn Brahm's talk on OBEs.
It's a lot to take in. What really stands out is how consistently these experiences are described as, well, pleasant, peaceful, even joyful.
Yeah, and they seem to offer these potential glimpses into consciousness, into reality that go way beyond our normal everyday experience.
So what's compelling, I think, is that it's not just anecdotes anymore. There is this accumulating evidence, personal accounts backed by more systematic research suggesting OBEs are perhaps more than just, imagination.
It really pushes us to maybe broaden our understanding of the mind, its potential, what it might be capable of.
And thinking back to Anita Moorjani's story, it shows how gaining insight from these kinds of experiences, understanding consciousness differently, could potentially lessen that deep fear of death many people have.
And maybe even bring clarity, like it did for her, about the underlying causes of problems or challenges we face in life.
Which leads us to a really potent thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over.
If consciousness does extend beyond our physical life, beyond the body,
how might really grasping that, really internalizing that possibility, shift your perspective
on what you do day to day, your relationships, what you genuinely prioritize?
It certainly gives us a lot to think about, doesn't it? Perhaps this discussion has sparked something in you, a desire maybe to revisit that original talk by Ajahn Brahm, or just explore these fascinating, sometimes mysterious aspects of consciousness and reality a bit further on your own.